Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating framework from writer and humanist David Andersson. It is an analysis that fundamentally shifts how we view global events. We spend so much time trying to make sense of the world through the daily news cycle, analyzing borders, treaties, and trade deals. But what if we're only looking at the surface? Anderson proposes that to truly understand the massive transformations happening around the globe right now, we need to look way beyond traditional geopolitics. We actually need to examine the deep cultural currents driving humanity. Honestly, when I first read this, it completely changed how I look at the news. I am so excited to unpack this framework with you because it offers a completely fresh lens on how we understand our world. So let's start with a really provocative question. What if our political labels are missing the real story? We're so used to categorizing the world through strict political positions, right? We're always thinking in terms of left versus right, progressive versus conservative, democracy versus authoritarianism, capitalism versus socialism. We try to explain international events solely through the actions of governments, military alliances, or struggles for economic power. But Anderson argues that these traditional lenses might just be the visible expression of something much, much deeper.
Section 1. Two cultural directions.
Okay, let's dive into this. Beneath the political surface and the economic rivalries, societies are actually driven by how they relate to history itself. It's not necessarily about what political position a society holds, but rather what direction that society is moving in. Anderson identifies two primary cultural directions. On one side, we have a future-oriented culture. This is a society that accepts that the world changes and actually embraces that transformation. It's willing to experiment, to learn, to integrate new knowledge, and to imagine forms of life that literally do not yet exist. On the flip side, we have a past-oriented culture. Instead of looking forward, this direction looks backward. It seeks security in the known. It tends to defend a fixed identity and often works to reconstruct this idealized version of history. And what's really crucial to grasp here is that these directions don't neatly align with political parties. You can totally have a future-oriented impulse inside a conservative society or a reactionary, past-oriented impulse inside a progressive movement. Now, what actually happens when a society leans heavily into the past? Well, we get what Anderson calls the devolution of identity. Look, identity itself isn't a problem at all. Humans need memory and belonging to thrive, for sure. But this four-step process shows how identity can devolve into a political weapon. Step 1, we start with a complex, contradictory history. That is the reality of every nation. But in Step 2, that history gets reduced and frozen into a rigid story of who we really are. Step 3, memory is replaced by a fabricated, idealized past, basically imagining a nation as purer, safer, and better than it ever actually was. And finally, Step 4 is the creation of an enemy. A fabricated identity almost inevitably needs an enemy to blame for the loss of that imagined past. It could be a foreigner, another religion, or honestly simply anyone who represents change. Fear essentially becomes the energy holding that whole identity together.
Section 2. Asia's future focus.
To test this philosophical lens against real-world events, let's look at the massive transformations happening in Asia right now. Take the 50 years of Chinese transformation. Through Anderson's framework, China's incredible rise over the last half-century shouldn't be understood only through government decisions or top-down geopolitical calculations. Beneath all of that visible change was a massive, shared cultural aspiration among hundreds of millions of people. It was this collective drive to overcome poverty, develop their country, acquire new technology, and create better conditions for the next generation. The past definitely remained a part of their identity, but their primary aspiration was pointed directly at the future.
Listen to how Anderson sums this up. It's perfect. The cultural direction came first, the consequences followed. I just want to let that sink in for a second. We so often think of geopolitical power as the starting point, right? But Anderson suggests that China's growing geopolitical influence is a consequence, not a cause. Power didn't just emerge from nowhere. It was the accumulated result of millions of people sharing a long-term aspiration to move toward the future.
And hey, this cultural momentum isn't limited to global superpowers. Take Bangladesh. Just a decade ago, Bangladesh was largely peripheral to the imagination of major geopolitical powers. But suddenly, it has completely shifted the global strategic calculations of India, China, and the United States. Why? Because an entire generation decided to change direction. Just look at how fast this change can happen. In 2024, a youth-led movement rose up to challenge the established political order. This quickly escalated into weeks of mass demonstrations that faced a really brutal crackdown. Yet, despite the danger, literally days later, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was forced to flee to India. And then,
An interim government was established under Muhammad Yunus. The key takeaway here isn't merely the fall of a government, it's the astonishing speed at which a society changed its historical position. Conventional geopolitics totally fails to see this coming because the driving force wasn't a foreign power. It was a young generation firmly deciding that the inherited past was simply no longer acceptable.
Furthermore, one generation's breakthrough can completely open the imagination of another in neighboring societies. We're already seeing echoes of this in India with the youth-led cockroach movement, which is rapidly emerging to challenge institutional injustice. Now, whether it produces structural changes comparable to Bangladesh is yet to be seen, but the cultural dynamic is undeniable here. Young people are discovering that the political reality they inherited is not the reality they have to accept.
Section 3. The West's Tech Hesitation.
So what happens when the future itself becomes the problem? We can clearly see this in the West's reaction to artificial intelligence. AI has the potential to be one of the most transformative technologies humanity has ever created, yet the response in parts of the West is increasingly one of suspicion. There are deep, completely legitimate concerns regarding ecological damage from massive data centers, fears of widespread job destruction, anxieties over mass surveillance and misinformation, and a profound dread over the loss of human autonomy. Now, the source makes it very clear that these are highly valid concerns that absolutely need to be addressed and regulated. But Andersson asks us to look at the cultural current beneath them. Transformation itself is increasingly being viewed as a threat, and this reaction is coming from all corners of the political spectrum, left, right, environmentalists, and corporations alike.
So the crucial point really boils down to this. Are we asking how to shape the future or how to prevent it from changing the world we know? A future-oriented culture doesn't just blindly accept technology. It asks how to control the risks so the tech can serve humanity. But a culture becoming oriented toward the past experiences the transformation itself as a terrifying threat. The intense reaction to AI might actually be a symptom of a culture quietly trying to freeze time.
Section 4. The Ultimate Geocultural Conflict. By pulling all these case studies together, from the youth movements in Asia to the tech hesitation in the West, we really start to see the much bigger picture. Behind the surface-level struggles for territory, resources, and markets, there lies a much deeper battle. It is a conflict over the meaning of change itself. Humanity has entered a period where technological, ecological, and demographic transformations are all accelerating at the exact same time. We literally cannot stop history. The uncertainty of this acceleration can either frighten us back toward an imagined past, or it can become the space where something entirely new is built. Which leaves us with this final, profound question to consider. As you look at your own society, your own community, ask yourself this: will we have the courage to create a future that does not yet exist, or the fear that drives us to defend a fabricated past? Because the deepest choice we face today isn't between political parties or geopolitical blocs. It is a choice of our cultural direction. I really hope this framework sparks as much curiosity for you as it did for me. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and until next time, keep looking deeper.